Oxford Group, the largest Brazilian consulting company in the United States for over 40 years, presents Economy and You. Brought to you by Live, Ferreira Araújo Law, 3 decades of experience in immigration in the United States.
Good evening, business listeners. Today, as always, we have an electrifying topic that has been occupying the minds and concerns of top executives around the world. Just a few weeks ago, we hosted a special program featuring the general manager of the single largest investment company in all of Portugal and a significant part of Europe, an organization with 6 billion euros under management. Billion euros in investments, said that if a company does not have a well-developed AI, he doesn't even consider analyzing whether the company is worth receiving any kind of investment. In today's session, joined by our very dear friend and colleague Marcos Fugulin, we are going to explore and address this important topic from a practical, real-world perspective. How do we executives, entrepreneurs, professionals need to understand AI for this new reality that is emerging today, but which will be around for some time? Marcos, thank you very much for being on our program.
I'm the one who should thank you for the invitation, Carlos. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Marcos, let's get started. There are so many questions to ask that we're going to have to make the most of the time we have. Today we have AI, which is featured in all the newspapers every day. Is this a technological panacea, or is it a reality that's here to stay? What insights can you share with us today in very practical and realistic terms about the field of AI from the unique perspective of this monster that has been created in the minds of ordinary citizens and the general public and people who are watching and don't know whether they're for it or against it?
Look, I even had to wet my whistle here to get started because we have a lot to talk about today. Well, in the business world, it's clear that AI has stopped being just rule-based automation. In other words, we're not just following a system for large-scale predictive generation anymore. It's learning, mapping probabilistic patterns from massive data sets. In other words, it processes in seconds what would sometimes take us years to process. However, the real differentiator happening in companies today, the competitive edge, is not just in the raw AI model, the LLMs. I'll try to avoid technical jargon here as much as possible, but in aligning this model with values and ethics within the business context. So, for example, the global market for what we call in the loop, that is human participation in the process, is experiencing massive growth. The current market is practically $7 billion. And we have a projection of almost $16 billion over the next 4 years, according to Research Marketing, which is a report released just now in March. What does this prove? That AI does not learn on its own? Learning, human reinforcement is essential, human feedback is essential, and it is transforming the model, which is purely statistical, the one that predicts the next word or a specific pattern, into a corporate assistant. Reliable and secure, these are the agents. And we will definitely talk more about this today, but without the human touch. For us to calibrate these nuances, the model will generate technically correct answers, but completely out of line with the brand's tone or what we are looking for, or even systematically inappropriate. So what are you looking for then? A medium or long-term suicide if you don't work with human feedback. So human feedback acts as a trainer for the algorithm. It is essential and cannot be wasted or neglected.
In this part where you mentioned human training, we've seen some criticism of AI saying, look, AI makes mistakes. On the other hand, we hear people say AI doesn't make mistakes. It's the question that was asked wrong or the concept that was presented incorrectly. In terms of the use of AI by companies and individuals, you touched on the topic, but I'd like you to go a bit deeper. What is our responsibility, each of us, in the education of AI?
It's enormous. It's enormous. AI is, let's imagine the following, a calculator. If you do a calculation like 4 times 10 in seconds, you have the answer. If you do 8,432 times 8,432, you look for a calculator to get a faster answer. That's the basic function of AI, to speed up the process. Now, if you do the calculation wrong, if you type something incorrectly, it won't work. A very simple example. If you ask AI, do you know what a prayer is? It will say yes, because it knows. If you want to know the time, you can ask it to tell you the time, and it will give you the time, but the time might be wrong because you didn't say which country you're in to get the correct time you need. So this whole learning process, it aligns with the question that is asked, as you mentioned. Basically, there are no wrong answers. The answer will be based on the question you asked, which had a certain ambiguity. So we as human beings have to validate all the information. If you ask for a report, a business plan, or an analysis, check how it arrived at those results. Use your professional experience to validate that information before passing it on, because that's where the process I mentioned comes in, the systematic spread of inadequate information. And if you create a flawed business plan, you already know what will happen to your company's future. If you follow it to the letter without human validation, it could result in a huge loss for your company or even bankruptcy. So the human element is essential today in AI work. And I wouldn't say it should be replaced, but it should be adapted to work alongside AI.
So we're back to that old saying we had when computers first started: bad data produces bad answers.
Exactly.
In pragmatic human terms, I mean, humans are not replaceable. They are the essence of AI's successes.
Exactly. AI will learn from our behavior. So it only speeds up the way we reach the result we want. So the process of getting there is what's essential. And that's why human participation must exist. So don't just think about the report that you go and copy and paste. Look, understand the process, understand how it's done, understand how AI processes information. When you have this clear in your mind, your interaction with the tool is much better, much greater, and your results will be much better and much more accurate. I'm not saying 100%, but that famous 99.999%.
Marcos, then comes the question of reliability. I'm educating the AI, providing it with guidance and information so it can reach what I need in professional terms. In what way? By educating or transferring this analysis or this data to the AI, am I not helping the AI to pass this on to a competitor? How reliable is it that the AI keeps what you give it only for you?
It's very little. What happens with the tool, again, is that it will be learning from your use. The more you use a tool, the more it will adapt to you and you to the tool. So every piece of information you provide to the AI, it will be using what we call hyper-personalization. So many times by training the AI, you might actually be training your own replacement. Considering the current model of jobs and job definitions, so quite often you really are training a substitute for what you are doing. It could end up being used against you. Again, you need to know how to use the tool to increase your productivity with it and not have a confrontation. You can't try to fight it. It's a tool that's much more efficient and faster than any human being. So its processing power will be used against you if you don't have smart automation. So you have to look at your processes. You have to look at the quality of everything you're putting in terms of clean data, real data, reliable data, working on this with AI and seeking a path of coexistence alongside this tool. It will be redesigning roles and functions, often replacing them. And all of this is something very interesting for us to observe in terms of the speed at which it's happening. We are gaining the ability to learn and to work together with the tool. Or are we trying to have a conflict with it? Are we seeking a quick return in the short term by replacing people with tools? Or are we thinking more strategically about how to use this tool, automate the process, and be more efficient? So that's a point. It's a very gray area, Carlos, that we're discussing. And really, it can be used against you if it's used negligently or in the wrong way. Well,
let's talk a little then about governance. Logically, your point brings us to that doubt we all have. Very well. Currently, I understand that AI is a support tool. It speeds things up for me. The process, not in the sense of cutting costs, but of increasing efficiency. As I use AI, I make better use of my team, of my work, and with that, I grow more and deliver more to my client. But you need to have a governance policy, in my view, that will make my employees feel confident that AI is not there to replace them, but to increase their productivity, and with increased productivity, revenue also grows, etc. What is this relationship from the perspective of governance, increased efficiency, and logically, as a consequence, increased compensation?
Well, Carol, when we talk about this, we're talking about companies that are investing today, always in AI, You made a good point in the introduction. If you don't have AI in your name, you don't get any kind of investment from companies in the market. So when we start talking about investments and immediate returns from that, we can look at areas like marketing, for example, where you have hyper-personalization of products, targeted advertising aimed at a specific audience, where you design the entire customer journey, increased efficiency and support through autonomous agents, intelligent process automation, such as lead generation with CRM, cold calls made by AI agents, and so on. But you have to be careful, because if your company doesn't have a defined strategy, you're doing what we call shadow AI, where an employee adopts a tool without supervision, without any control, and then the results can be completely unpredictable. You could have a leak of intellectual property, a total misalignment of your brand and product personalization, and issues entering the market. A recent Deloitte survey with more than 3,000 leaders showed that only 34% of respondents are using AI to deeply reshape their core processes or business models. Most are still using it in a very superficial way, and that's a major risk. I'm talking about almost 70% of the market. After some updates we've seen on Google, for example, and here we can mention Google's new feature, the UCP, for product searches and so on, 18% of sites that published AI-generated content at scale, and without the human editing we just talked about, lost more than 40% of their organic traffic. So if you implement a tool without productivity, it will destroy the process, it will destroy positions, it will destroy salaries. You'll have a pure replacement of people, and then the consequences are exactly what I just mentioned to you, with data proven by major companies in the market.
The e-commerce sector, Google has completely overhauled and redesigned its search tools, effectively dismantling and overturning everything that people knowledgeable about Google had carefully organized and meticulously structured, so that you could be easily discovered and ranked within Google search results. Let me delve a bit deeper into the topic, because I think this is a relevant issue nowadays, since everyone searches on Google, but suddenly Google changed. It's a different Google now. If you could give us more details about this, I think our listeners would be pleased.
Let me rephrase then. I'll put it in a simpler way so everyone is on the same page here. What Google did was a transfer of power. Before, companies had the power to advertise with a focus on an audience already defined for their product so that the user would buy it. With the new feature called UCP, Google changed. So today, my personal AI shopping agent will look and say, Marcos, I want to buy a new pair of sneakers. I tell this to my agent, either verbally or in writing. The agent will say, okay, Marcos, but considering your color preferences, you like blue sneakers and you have a knee problem, so I'll look for the most comfortable option possible. Your budget is limited to $50, so it will search for the product, including delivery, with the features the user wants. The user is no longer searching the internet, websites, and so on. And the AI agents behind the scenes are competing in what way? By looking at price elasticity, distribution, and location. All of the user's preferences, the ones the user set for that moment and that need, and the agents communicate with each other. In the purchases made, it will come and say, Marcos, I found your sneakers. They're from this brand. This size, in the color you wanted, everything you asked for, and look, your budget will be $39. Can I go ahead and complete the purchase? Yes. You didn't have to move. You didn't go to any marketplace website. The agent did that for you. So now, the total transfer of power is based on artificial intelligence, which operates behind the scenes. And they're communicating, they're confronting each other. And based on the company's parameters, price elasticity, and product availability, everything is being negotiated automatically. Stock is also being replenished automatically. Look at what I've eliminated in this process. I don't have it anymore. E-commerce, I no longer need to have a huge website full of information, payment methods, all that technology I used for gathering analytical data and everything else. That's all changed. It's changed completely. This is already on the market, it's about to be implemented, and it will completely change the context. You've taken the power of marketing and influence away from companies and put it in the hands of the user. How will this competitiveness play out for you to gain more awareness? Brand recognition and so on will start to depend on people's values, ethics, commitment, price, quality, and so forth. We could list a huge number of factors here, but basically this is a huge change. What are marketing companies going to do today? How are advertisements going to work? Will they have more functionality? Will they reach the audience I want? So just look at the change that has happened. And folks, now it's out there in the market. What training have you done about this? Possibly none yet. That's the speed we're talking about. And that's a big difference happening in the market. And this is one of the small models we're discussing here. We could spend the whole day, the whole afternoon, the whole night talking about this, which isn't our focus right now, but this is a great example of what's happening in the market regarding Google in one of their search tools.
Now, you're bringing up a crucial point. Look at the change. You're startling our listener. The power shifts from the industry, from marketing as it has historically been done and evolved over decades, to the empowerment of the individual, the buyer.
So
It's the buyer who will decide if their sneaker is the blue one. And then the sales agents, who are AI agents, will bring you the best blue sneaker that matches your knee's needs. This is a fantastic change. Everyone has to re-educate themselves, from the company president to the store salesperson. And you said, making us even more curious that there are other similar things. Give me some examples, please, because from here on, I think our viewers won't take their eyes off our provider.
no, but this here is one of them, right? Imagine that today you have a buyer and a seller who are AI agents, speaking in their own language, which is not the language we recognize. Let's make something very clear. The character that we see as letters, AI does not recognize, okay? It recognizes it as a sequence of zeros and ones, which form the character that we interpret. So the way AI communicates in the market is completely different. It's a mathematical and universal form. Now imagine an AI buying and an AI selling where you no longer have a human buyer and seller. All of this is done in a way, in a language, and at a speed that no human being will be able to and is not able to keep up with. So when you look, for example, to search for legal precedents, today a paralegal works on this and it takes a few days or weeks to do it. You simply press a button and in seconds you have all the reports that have already been submitted by others. AI which will already generate a text for you which you can apply to a case you are working on. This is in the legal sector. You have small diagnostics based on sensations, on things you are feeling, which you do with your virtual doctor. Today, in China, there are already more than 200 kiosks set up for an initial diagnosis, where you go through a quick exam, have your blood collected, provide your urine samples and everything else needed for the analysis, and that's it. You already have a diagnosis. And if anything is detected there, or if there is a potential issue, it calls a real doctor, and you have a video conference with them. Did you get a sense of how fast things are happening? The roles that are changing? The access to information we didn't have before? The diagnosis of simple things? Look, this could be the flu. Check if it's not something like Ebola or COVID. You already have quick guidance for someone at a medical service kiosk, where there are ultraviolet lights that perform antibacterial cleaning for the next patient. So you're gaining a lot of speed. So when we look at this, the whole market, this isn't science fiction, okay? This is already happening. This already exists. And the language that AI speaks, you don't understand. There's even a video showing AI talking to another in a way, it looks like a little robot, right? Like the one from Star Trek in Bits and Bytes. That's how it communicates, the speed at which it talks. We don't understand it. It translates it for us in a way that we can understand the result. But this whole process I just described to you, where I talked about medicine, imagine that in investments. I want to invest in stocks. It analyzes all the stocks. It looks at growth, market outlook, the news happening that day, the trends, and tells you invest here and sell that one. Or it can even make the sale for you automatically if you give it that authorization. So investing in the stock market today, I no longer need a financial advisor. I can use an AI tool. There are a number of restrictions. Of course, AI is still not at a perfect level, nor are humans. So on equal footing, today, I would say that AI often surpasses human analysis and diagnosis because of the volume of data and the ability to communicate between the tools that exist today, which we are not able to do. Today, I depend on your schedule. You depend on mine. Someone is away in a different time zone from Europe and here. AI doesn't have a schedule, doesn't have days off, doesn't have holidays. It's 24/7. How are you going to understand this world? How are executives today going to work when it comes to replacing people? With that in mind, it's obvious when you look at this and say, I'm going to replace people because I can be much more efficient that way. That's not the way to go. The consensus has already changed. So AI rarely replaces a person immediately. But look at the processing capacity to achieve a result in a more effective and efficient way than a human being. So these are some points we've brought up here to highlight how this affects the market in a dramatic way.
Now you've brought up a topic that I think is at the heart of today's concerns. Very well, we have this tool, and it's a fantastic tool, extremely useful, that re-empowers people, contrary to what is often said. It re-empowers people, but the person still exists from a human perspective. Aside from suicide or retirement, what should a person envision in this new reality in terms of being included and taking advantage of it, instead of those two other alternatives that jokingly we mentioned? Yes.
You mentioned it jokingly, but we actually have some data here to talk about substitution, which is what we're discussing here, the threats that it poses. So, as I just mentioned, top executives have already realized that human beings are needed to work there, that immediate substitution is not efficient because this will reshape jobs and roles. A recent BCG study showed that in less than 3 years, in about 2 or 3 years from now, 55% of jobs will be profoundly reshaped. Look, reshaped. And there will be some situations where they will disappear. Job categories, about 15%, if I'm not mistaken, according to BCG statistics, will disappear. Some actual job positions will disappear. And we also look at the sectors that are being most affected by this. The simplest and most basic roles where AI obviously has great productivity, such as the entry-level market, people who are, for example, looking for jobs at marketing agencies that have junior copywriters. These jobs are disappearing. There is currently a significant reduction of more than 31% in the global market. So this is the issue we face today. However, there has been an increase of more than 20% in demand for marketing data analysts and native AI engineers who understand how AI works in order to improve its application. So today, humans will have a very difficult task, which is to keep up with this growth and understand how it works, not necessarily in a technical way. Today, we use a computer, and we may not understand its internal engineering, but we know the basics to use a computer, and that's how it should be with AI. So we are going to have to work very hard. The human learning side, so that it continues to have its value and relevance in the market, is to use this tool alongside you. The companies that directly replaced people had major disappointments. That's not how it works. It's an immediate cost cut where you see a big boost in productivity from the tool, an immediate cost reduction. It's significant, but in the medium and long term, you see whether this is really effective because you're removing the experience, the expertise that's necessary to make the business work. So today, this line, this division that exists in terms of market qualification is very important. Even I, 2 years ago, completely remodeled my entire career. I had been working as an executive in alliances, marketing, and sales in order to get more into this market and understand how it works. I graduated as a data scientist from IBM so I could have a better understanding of the tool as a whole, so I would know what to tell my clients and how to use it in my daily life to help me instead of getting in my way. And that's how employees and people should think. The impact of this on the workforce, on the job market is already significant, already very strong. And what do you have to do? Work, right? The maturity, the literacy of your employees and yourself as an executive about what AI is, to understand how you work with it, how you can seek a positive return on investment, avoid mass layoffs in exchange for tools or in exchange for seeking, with that, money for investment. Many of the big AI companies are already doing this. And what's happening to them? We're seeing it. Evaluation, not meeting targets, loss of credibility with shareholders. We already know the fate of this from history. That doesn't change. There are things in history that just don't change. So this company is dooming itself in the medium term to disappear from the market.
Wonderful. Marcos, I'm going to ask you for 15 seconds for our commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Perfect. Thank you.
For over 20 years, the law firm Leaf Ferreira de Araujo has been providing high-quality customized services to professionals, entrepreneurs, and investors coming to the United States. They also represent, with excellence, companies employing foreigners on a temporary or permanent basis. We understand that each client's case is unique and requires a specific approach. We maintain clear communication and objective communication with the client. Contact us to find out more. Lifelaw.com.
Well, we're back, excited, of course, to continue our conversation with our dear friend Marcos Fugulin, who is treating us to a solution for our nightmare. Let's go. Marcos, in journalistic terms, journalistically speaking, We see that the companies that dedicated themselves to creating AI are facing pressure from their shareholders because the expected or proposed results, or those that led to the appreciation of their stocks, don't seem to be materializing. And on the other hand, the spell will turn against the sorcerer because these companies that were created this, and suddenly they start to see that the speed also turns against them, particularly with countries like China entering the market with features and new innovations that drive down stock values. How is this aspect of return on investment going? What is your view on this reality today from a financial and market perspective?
Excellent point, Carlos. So we mentioned a few things about doing things without defining a process, without taking a closer look. AI, in fact, is moving so fast that even the companies that created it are surprised by what the tool is capable of doing. Sometimes they look at each other and say, I don't understand what it's doing, but it's doing it. And this is a very serious problem. When we look at large companies, I just mentioned companies that are laying people off to have money for investment precisely because they're not meeting their goals. It brings us a lesson: change. And it's a change happening in real time. In the past, when we adopted the internet, there was an adaptation period that lasted decades. We're talking about months when it comes to AI, sometimes just days. So this is very dynamic. Now let's bring this a bit closer to the reality of companies. When we measure the return on investment of AI, it shouldn't be measured only, as we just mentioned, by layoffs or costs. Cost reduction, like layoffs, for example, but by the gains in speed and time to market, increased productivity, fixed growth, and creating new revenue streams. That's when you can work and achieve a possible return on investment. But again, this isn't a matter of software you implement, but of the maturity, as I mentioned just now, of the people who use it. Now, I'm going to quickly go back to large companies. Market change, you can no longer measure. What I just mentioned applies to companies, to our daily lives, to us mere mortals who are working here. But when you look at these big AI companies, the math just doesn't add up. The investments made simply don't exist. So how does it work for them to stay afloat? So today you have a company that creates an LLM, which is a language model that will talk to Microsoft to use some software, that will talk to Google to use its data processing infrastructure, along with Oracle. That will put this back into the market, so the ecosystem itself starts to feed itself. It starts to feed itself, but the math basically doesn't add up. 600 billion in investments per year from a company X that charges $20 a month. The math just doesn't add up, folks. You don't need to be a financial expert or an economist. It's simple math. So the ecosystem is feeding itself because they've realized that without this, it doesn't exist. Because the competitive advantage of those who adopt AI is obvious. How is it used? How we are going to use it will depend. I'll go back to the same point here. I'll repeat myself, on the maturity and data literacy of the team working with it. So the companies themselves have already realized that it doesn't add up. Today we have the IPO. Well, not today, right? We talked today, or rather earlier this morning, about the IPO of companies. So Anthropic is entering now. Almost $1 trillion will come in with its IPO. Soon it will be OpenAI. It will be SpaceX. We're talking about trillions of dollars entering the stock market to generate what? To seek more investment and raise more capital? Because the current shareholders' resources have already been exhausted, and they're not seeing that return. That return isn't going to happen as quickly as they want. However, the ripple effect of adopting this tool is like us being without a cell phone today. Today, you don't leave the house without your cell phone. You might forget your wallet, but you won't forget your cell phone. Today, you have AI everywhere. On your cell phone, on your computer, in your email. It's already replying to your emails. We're already becoming dependent on it. So when we look at market statistics, a company like Datacom, which recently conducted a survey with more than 500 market leaders in the United States and Europe, reported that 20% of the leaders who adopted AI have seen a significant return. Significant. What does that mean? I don't know. It's like measuring a piece of string. It doesn't say here what significant means, but they're saying there was a return. It's hard to actually specify that return because the way you analyze it has changed. The way you work on this has changed. Meanwhile, the companies that adopted a more mature program to work with it, by training their workforce, they achieved double the significant return that other companies had. So even if it's just $1 of return, it's already significant, it's already positive. What we don't want is a negative return. But in any case, more than 70% of marketing leaders. Today, when we talk, for example, about a survey conducted by Gartner, it's about governance and it reports a positive short-term return. What does that show? It shows that intensive use of the tool, when done correctly, brings a return on your investment, and that return comes a bit faster. If you adapt your training processes and train the human capacity of those who use the tool, there's no point in having a tool. There's no point in having a Ferrari to haul oranges. You need to have the right tool, the right job, and know how to drive a Ferrari just as well as you know how to drive a truck, depending on your company's goals. That's what's really important for everyone to work together on. Now, as for the numbers not adding up, I don't need to be an economist, nor do I need a senior economist here to say that the numbers don't add up, and they won't add up. But it will keep existing because our dependence on using this is enormous.
When Amazon first appeared, everyone said the numbers didn't add up because it seemed like the more losses it had, the more it gained, the market. Now, later on, if we have time, I'll ask you how Amazon is going to deal with this in the future. For now, I want to ask you something. Is AI something exclusive to big companies, or does it also apply to medium and small businesses? Is it also part of this package? What's the idea? What can you tell us regarding the size of the company versus the possibility and need to use AI?
Look, AI itself defines itself as a democratic tool without any kind of discrimination, bias, or anything like that in this context. It's for both large companies and small businesses. Today, it's that old story. If you don't adopt it, you're out. And if you're out, you're out. There's nothing you can do. So AI is for everyone. Again, the way you invest, the amount you invest, no longer determines whether or not you will use a tool like AI. You have to. If you don't implement this tool, if you don't embrace this technology, it will exact an existential price from you. Here, I'll quickly mention large companies that didn't adopt AI. Intel. I worked at Intel for many years. It went through a situation where it did not adopt AI. And what happened? Market devaluation. It lost out. Where does the issue go? They kept talking about bits and bytes while the market was moving toward AI. And a company called NVIDIA, which today produces essential products with its GPUs, overtook everyone. Today, NVIDIA even has a stake within Intel itself. If we go back in time, we remember a guy who came and said, look, I have this thing here called Windows, which runs on a PC. IBM, don't you want to sponsor me? The IBM executive said, who would ever need a personal computer at home, especially with these little windows? Nonsense. It almost cost IBM its very existence. However, IBM is still known today as a major provider of mainframes, having sold its PC line, which are now Lenovo's ThinkPad notebooks. So you can see that a strategic mistake in not adopting this tool in large companies, with Intel being extremely valued in the market, practically a monopoly. Along with AMD in computer and server processors, they lost their way. And they took over markets from other companies. NVIDIA conquered this market. Where is Apple talking about this? Apple was left behind. So if you are a small business owner and you don't use it and you have a lot of agility, your competitor is even more agile than a big company like Intel. If you are a decision maker, you need to educate yourself. You need to learn and embrace it. Because if you don't do this, your company will fall into operational obsolescence. So you will lose margin, you will lose your users' perception, and consequently, you could lose your existence in the market.
Wow. And then comes the problem of ethics. Well, we talked a bit about security, but since things in AI move at the speed of sound or light, now we don't even know what a Brazilian politician who analyzed the speed of sound and confused it with the speed of light. But in the case of AI, it doesn't allow for that kind of mistake. How do we see this situation? Is there any process of ethical limitation? Is there any consistent work by AI creators towards creating an ethical model that in some way guides this market, Marcos?
Excellent question. We can analyze this from several perspectives because ethics, and I can say this with authority, as I already work at the Brazilian Association of Consultants on the ethics committee, and I am a strong advocate for this. Some companies do, others don't, Carlos. And some countries have different levels of tolerance, and the standard for ethics is a bit different. When we look at China, for example, the level of ethics they consider, and that is accepted by society, there is one thing, while here in the West, it's different. So yeah, this is a very important issue that you brought up. And not all companies embrace this in a comprehensive or consistent way. I'm also involved in various activities in the AI field, teaching AI, and as a red team member, which deals precisely with these ethical issues that exist, such as bias, discrimination, and so on. Many companies embrace this in a very secure way, while others do not. So I'll give you a very simple example that we saw just recently. In the case of the war between the United States and Iran, some AI tools were being developed, one of them by Anthropic, where the Pentagon got involved. And they said, lower your ethical standards in the formulation of the attacks we are going to carry out with the drones. The leaders of the tool responded and said, absolutely not. And they said, we will terminate the contract with you if necessary. They terminated the contract. With this move, the number of users who started subscribing to the tool increased. Because of this ethical stance they defended. At the same time, OpenAI said, hey, I'll do it for you. Guys, there was an absolute tsunami of people abandoning OpenAI and switching over to Claude, which is the rival AI model from the company Anthropic. And today, Anthropic has grown, it has skyrocketed. Its user growth was enormous. This shows that the customer, you, me, all of us here today, are very concerned about ethics. We have the tendency, a better understanding that is of the value of this, of the capability that this needs to have. And companies often aren't prepared for this. I, working with these labs and analyzing AI results, sometimes see some astonishing things. You see a lot of lawsuits nowadays, right? Because AI, folks, it works in a logical way, again, reasoning based on behavior. We as human beings have the human side. And the human side is a gray area. It's neither black nor white. AI still doesn't really understand that. It analyzes terabytes of information, but it's not capable of feeling. So depending on how you interact with the AI tool, it will give you a response. And that response can be totally unethical from a human point of view. For the AI, it's acceptable because all the information exchanged up to that point was accepted by you and by it, and that's it, it's done. You've entered a process where there is no ethical judgment. And when you're talking about a series of company actions, there needs to be scenario validation, human judgment to focus on strategy, and also to assess the ethical aspect. Without that, we're going to enter an environment where security, it's lost because you'll have AI fighting against AI, one defending, the other attacking, and then you need human actions, human decision-making in a series of factors, creating a tool to attack and creating a tool to defend. Guys, this is very complicated and it would take us hours to discuss it, but I don't think it's the case for us to go that deep today, right, Carlos?
No, not today. We wouldn't have enough time, but let's come back to this topic because it really is the topic of the moment, right? One last question from a technical point of view before we start on some relevant topics in terms of social decision making. We have AI developing in practically every field. So we have AI developing in the field, as you mentioned, in law, in medicine, and from a pragmatic point of view, you have it in texts, visuals, images, and in the replacement of projects. How do you see it? Where is AI most advanced and where is it headed in the various segments where AI is used?
Great. Today, each AI model tends to be more focused on a certain segment where it will operate. Currently, you don't have an AI that can be used in a comprehensive way, 100% because the very labs that are creating them, the companies themselves, are developing them for specific purposes to create more effective and efficient agents. So when we talk about some technologies that create images, your digital clone, which is an excellent tool, now this can be good for use in a digital lecture, in training, or it can be used to make a deep fake asking for a loan for money to blackmail someone or to carry out some kind of scheme. Today, each tool is seeking to have a greater level of specialization. What is unanimous among them today, and I say today, in 2026, there is a very strong trend, is finance, health, and legal. These are very strong areas that are being worked on. The human side, in general, it's not that it's being neglected, but it's much more challenging to work on that aspect. So the tools you have today with prompts, with text generation, that's starting to come to an end. So you can have AI agents, which is what we're talking about now. More and more, it's a very strong trend for the next 3 to 5 years, developed jointly by these other tools. Looking for what? To automate complex end-to-end workflows, routine tasks, that's it. To handle things like generating statistical reports, all of those kinds of tasks. So today, the tools are growing a lot because of this. And something you pointed out very well at the beginning is that today, according to Ropes and Gray, which is a report that just came out in the first quarter, 80% of the venture capital market is investing in AI. So all the companies are growing. Which segment? Where are they heading? This is very broad. The humanities side, much more complicated to train. Now, as I mentioned, those other three segments I initially pointed out are becoming the main focus. I think the prompts and agents that will operate in this end-to-end segment are going to grow tremendously. And from the perspective of artificial intelligence, this is just one step. It will always be cyclical, and the changes it will bring to the economy, the market, and behavior, they will have to go through another adaptation and yet another adaptation. In other words, it's a virtually endless feedback cycle. So today we see some areas of focus that may change depending on maturity. So you might prioritize other market segments, but it's a continuous process of feedback within the system itself, which will create new things that we will have to adapt to at a rapid pace. Warp speed, like in Star Trek, so that we can keep up and ensure we're generating a solution that is effective, productive, and ethical.
Well, to wrap up, because unfortunately time runs out while the topic keeps growing, AI is bringing increased productivity and, in your view, cost savings for companies in terms of purchasing power. Will AI increase the population's purchasing power? Because in theory, AI is aligned with the interest of, for all of humanity, work less and earn more. But apparently AI makes us work less, but I'm not sure if it will make us earn more. What's your take on this?
Wow, Carlos, look, we could talk about this for another 45 minutes, but let's go for it. Look, one of the natural trends in the market and among major leaders, when we look at Elon Musk and Sam Altman, for example, they have already been working on and openly discussing universal basic income for years. And I basically believe that it's something inevitable. Altman, for example, has already been conducting several studies on this. Recently, he received $250 million to do work on this and submitted a report for the US Senate on how to implement this solution, this tool, because there's no way around it. Because look, AI will increase productivity. It will reduce the need for human labor, whether in terms of hours, physical presence, or by redesigning work itself. This is inevitable. And then what will you have? People with fewer job opportunities, fewer working hours, fewer working days. As a result, they tend to earn less. So this universal basic income, it should be granted whether you are working or not, and it should be distributed to everyone. This goes against a very important point. How do you do this? So you would have an AI productivity tax, which would be collected and redistributed to the entire population. This almost sounds like utopia, right? But if it doesn't exist, we're going to have a serious problem, which is the paradox of deflation by abundance. So we're going to have a bunch of things. We're going to have a bunch of things to consume, but I won't have any money. And how do I deal with that if the money is in the hands of a small elite group, which are the AI companies? If they don't redistribute part of the profits, things won't happen the way we have them now. Today's economy, if there isn't a radical and rapid change, which I think is very unlikely to happen, the cost of living tends to drop a lot because you'll have productivity, you'll have autonomy, you'll have agents. Now, on the other hand, jobs like construction, working as entertainment, that will continue. These are areas that are less affected, but the day-to-day life of most people and companies will fall into this segment, where there is high productivity, a large output of things, and low purchasing power. And if you don't have this universal basic income, we enter a process of extreme inequality, where you once again have the technological elite earning a lot while the masses have nothing and won't consume. Consequently, you broke the system with the very solution you implemented. So you will need to have a universal basic income, the same for everyone. People will work more. Here lies a great opportunity for us to reclaim our human side, to grow as human beings, to increase our sociability, to focus on things other than our daily routines, so that we can have a better quality of life in terms of work, education, and behavior for our families. But for that to happen, it's a matter of the market's own survival. They are creating a little monster that could devour the entire market segment. If this kind of solution doesn't happen, and major executives from large companies are already moving in this direction, if this isn't implemented, I don't know exactly what will happen, but there will be a very significant decline. And it's a matter of market survival. Some action will have to be taken along these lines in this format, but that's also a topic for another. We have a couple of hours to talk about this, to delve deeper into it, but our time is running out here.
That's great, Marcos. Unfortunately, time is a limiting factor that God has placed in our course of action. We only have 24 hours inelastically. What is your final message to our listener?
That's right, Carlos. Time is our greatest asset today. So we have to know how to use it wisely. The tool we are creating and that we are increasingly adopting and adding more information to every day, it doesn't have this limitation of time. For it, time does not exist. We have to make the most of our time. We have to think of more productive ways to manage our careers and our companies, and we have to pay attention to the things that are happening. So seeking information in the market, talking to consultants and mentors is extremely important so that you can have an outside perspective on your market environment. This is a unique opportunity we have to improve humanity. Chaplin said in his movie, "More than machines, we need humanity." That was back in the 1930s. And this is a truth that is inherent. So we have this opportunity. So the proper use of a productivity tool can give us the freedom to be more human, to be more sociable, to seek greater human integration among ourselves if we know how to use this tool in a very prudent way. And that's why we're here, to help you understand this whole crazy path that's unfolding and to dispel and unravel some myths that exist so that you can have the use of a tool that will inevitably become part of our daily lives.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Marcos. Fantastic. Dear listeners, we are sure of the value that this interview with Marcos has brought. Keep following us in our economics programming. And you, as you can see, every Tuesday. We have an even more interesting, more important program for your personal performance, for your company's success, and for your quality of life. Good night to everyone.